Okay, it's 15:30 CET, so I'm going to start. Hello and welcome everybody to the second GLM meeting of 2021. My name is Anya Sitharam and it's my real pleasure to be with you again. For those of you who were at the April meeting, I really look forward to hearing your contributions again and seeing you again. And for those of you who weren't and who I haven't met, I look forward to hearing your inputs into the conversation. And just sitting here watching you all log in and seeing where you're from, it's really fantastic to have such a fantastic global representation. And some of you are here very early in the morning or very late at night. So we really do appreciate it. And I hope it's going to be worth your while. Just while I'm here, there's a little bit of housekeeping to do. So you'll notice that you've received different links for different days. So if you have a link that says Tuesday, please use that one and not the Monday one. Otherwise, you could just be waiting in limbo. So please use that. We've also got French and English interpretation. So do use that. You can see the details, they are in the chat, and also at the bottom of the screen, there's an interpretation sign. If you can't see that, go to more and it'll show you the way round to get to the interpretation. And of course, you already are interacting a lot. Thank you so much. And we want this to be as much of a conversation as possible. We want to hear your thoughts and your questions. So as we go along with each session, please put your questions in the chat and we will try and answer them after each session. And at the very end of today, we do have a little bit more time allocated to answer any questions that we didn't manage to get at the time. And maybe you'll think of some new ones and new into the conversation. And if you have a question, can you remember to put your name and organization in the chat? If it's just a comment, then don't worry about it. You can just put your comment in, and as long as it's okay. Anyway, just to give you a bit more information about the meeting, it's divided into 4 pillars. So today's session is going to be the information session. And then on Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday, we have the very important second pillar of governance and strategy and consultation sessions where designated logistic focal points of humanitarian organisations with field presence will discuss the logistics cluster strategy of 2022 to 2026 and also, of course, review the implementation plans. And then on Thursday, we have the academic marketplace sessions where through humanitarian logisticians will be working with the academic sector to drive forward adaptations and improvements in emergency response through learning and analysis. And of course, we'll have the 4th pillar, which is the general marketplace sessions where all interested parties can engage in the global logistics partner support team and partners in innovative projects. So there we have an overview for you there. Lots of conversations to be had, and also a couple of really interesting panel discussions as well. So to give us a bit more of a flavour of what's coming up, I'm going to invite Athalie Mayo, Global Logistics Cluster Coordinator. Athalie.
Hi Anya, just doing a quick comms check again, is that okay?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you.
Okay, great. Well, I hope if you can, then the comms are working for everybody else, even if they're dialing in from some very remote places. So just to add my thanks there to everybody who's joined us today. Really appreciate you coming together with us on this session. And as Anya said, it's going to be another action-packed GLM. We were really disappointed not to be able to do it face-to-face. As many of you will know, the LOGS cluster GLMs happen twice a year. And up until COVID, they were normally face-to-face meetings. And we were really hoping to be actually in Leuven. I see Professor Nico is with us today. We were really hoping to be in Leuven this time around, but we're still trying to adapt and overcome with the effect of the pandemic. So we're online yet again. once more, we mentioned silver linings to the clouds last time. And of course, the great thing is that this time round, it means we have at least cut our carbon footprint, cut our costs, and another fantastic advantage is that we can have even more people participate on different time zones on the online version. So trying to take the good with the bad, even though we're not face to face, to make really the best of this great opportunity with everybody involved. So yeah, it's going to be a busy session, Anya. And as you said, we're going to have different elements of the GLM this time. This afternoon and tomorrow morning, we've got the informational sessions, we've called them this time round, where we've got a whole series of updates on different aspects of logistics cluster activities and initiatives. We're doing a bit of a combo in terms of the format. So some of the elements are pre-recorded, so we don't, or at least we minimize technical issues, but we're going to make sure we've got the opportunity in between all of those sessions and at the end for Q&A, so that we can hear comments from you all or questions as we go through. And as you mentioned, Anya, it's a big year for us this year for the logistics cluster, because we are finalizing, or hopefully finalizing, the strategy for 2022 and beyond, the next 5 years. And we really hope to develop a robust strategy that will take into account the changing face of humanitarian needs as we move forward, so that we're ready to support as best we can as a community of partners.
So Ashley, we're going to be, this meeting is actually just before the future defining, or the decade defining COP26 in Glasgow, and sustainability and environment are an important focus of this week's discussions, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all humanitarians sign up to the concept of do no harm. And I think that concept extends equally to the impact on the environment. And whether it's, I mean, of course, it's unintended, but we're very conscious that we also have our part to play in ensuring that humanitarian operations and the supply chains of those humanitarian operations really minimize as far as possible the negative impact on the environment and on the communities that we're serving. So it's been very much something that we want to try and drive forward together as a community, because we recognize that there are many fantastic initiatives out there by many humanitarian organizations really trying to make headway in this area. But I think most of us would agree that the enormity of the climate crisis at the moment means that whatever we can do to come together in a consistent, systematic, complementary way will really help accelerate what we're trying to do to minimize the impact on the environment as humanitarian logisticians. And we have some really great news in terms of catalyzing that activity, which is since the last GLM, when we met in April, we're really delighted and thrilled to have received some donor funding for a very special project in this area. And we have a project which is very unique, because for the first time it is a project coordinated by the Global Logistics Cluster, but with a steering committee composed of a number of the partners who've come together to try and drive this forward. So we have the Danish Refugee Council, the International Federation of the Red Cross, and we have Save the Children and WFP joining together on behalf of all of the partners to try and really, as I say, catalyze everything that we're doing, all of those different initiatives that everybody has, and try and bring it together so that we can really enable humanitarian logisticians to minimize the impact, whether it be at the planning stage of humanitarian operations, during the operations, or afterwards. And of course, this is very much about waste from relief items and about the impact of transport on the environment. And we're really pleased now to get that off the ground. We're going to hear a lot more about it, by the way, in the general marketplace on Friday, where we'll give a detailed overview on the initiative. And as I said, a huge thanks to our donors for really letting us get this up and off the ground and inject some momentum into that and move it forwards, because I think we all recognise that all of us, whether it be personally or professionally, have a big role to play in that.
Okay, and you mentioned the marketplace there. We've also got a meeting with academics to highlight the benefits of working with academia.
Yeah, exactly, Anya. And it's something, actually, if you look back, I mean, we're developing our new strategy now, but if you look back at the current logistics cluster strategy, which has spread over 6 years and ends at the end of this year, there's been a huge emphasis on collating good practice and learning. And I think most of the logistics cluster partners, the humanitarian logisticians, they have a real will to try and drive forward this longer term learning, but many of us are heads down in the immediate operational response, and it's difficult to drive that forward in a longer term fashion. And this is where the collaboration with the academic community is really so valuable to us. And it's been a long-term collaboration in many ways with a number of really great initiatives. And as you say, this time round for the GLM, we're also going to be focusing on that significantly so that we can bring together those academic institutions looking at research in the area of humanitarian logistics and bring together the loggies themselves so that they can interact and take that forward. So yes, it's another great flavour of this year's GLM.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And let's now get down to business. And just a quick housekeeping request from me that if you have any notifications on your computers or your phones, please can you switch them off so we don't hear pinging throughout today's conversations. Natalie, we're going to start now with the first of our information sharing sessions. So you're going to present the year in review. And just to remind all of you that if you have any questions, ping them in the chat without making a noise in the notification. But apart from that, over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Annie. I hope that won't mean pinging. I'm not so technically savvy, so apologies for that. And also apologies to everybody for an overload from the beginning here. We promised not to do death by PowerPoint, but we're kicking off with a PowerPoint, so we'll try and keep it a little bit minimum. Those of you who joined us for the last GLM might remember that we introduced a new initiative which was trying to put some numbers around partner participation in the logistics cluster. And what we've got now is a few slides on that which are looking back at 2021. It says year in review, but of course with the first 3 quarters of 2021. So looking back at 2021 so far to try and represent a little bit the participation and engagement with the partners in logistics cluster operations. A lot of this is looking at the in-country operations, but also we will touch on some of those global activities and engagements and exchanges with partners. I'm just checking if I'm talking too fast because I'm very conscious that the poor ladies and gentlemen doing translation might want to stab me after this, but is that okay?
I think
great.
Yeah.
Safely move ahead. Okay, well, Simone, would you mind taking us to the next slide? So here is a slide that many of you will know and hopefully love. It's a little bit much on a PowerPoint slide, but I hope that will encourage you to dig into our website and really look at the great information that is in there about the activities and the operations on the ground. So what we're looking at here is in the very beautiful teal or sea blue color there, we have the countries in which the field-based preparedness project has been active over 2021. And you're going to be hearing a lot more of that later on today from the mouths of the field-based preparedness project partners and team later on. And then in red, the classic logs cluster color, you have the formally activated logistics cluster operations. What do I mean by that? Those are those operations where the country team has requested the emergency relief coordinator to greenlight the official YASC IASC activation of a logistics cluster. In dark blue, I think it looks dark blue from here. In dark blue, we have what we call other sectoral coordination mechanisms, logs sectoral coordination mechanisms. This one is actually a little bit more difficult to represent. Here we've got Bangladesh, Libya, Nigeria and Haiti. What we don't necessarily see are the many other logistics sectoral coordination mechanisms that there are around the world, all of which we support in different degrees. Some of them are very happily up and running and don't need any support at all, but some of them do reach out to us occasionally for support, whether it be with IM or other tools. And this is one of the more difficult areas to represent, but just to let you know, it's not just the logs cluster activated countries, but also the other countries where there might be an in-country sector or logs working group that we very much interact with and are there to support the partners in country. I think we will move on, Simone, from this slide so people can have a look on the website. Okay, Drawing breath slightly, we wanted to start off here with a snapshot of the kind of bedrock of the logs cluster, and that is coordination. Very hard to represent coordination in numbers, and we've probably got two metrics there. One is about the number of meetings. So far 315 coordination meetings up until the end of September in the country operations. And the other metric is about the number of organizations that have engaged in those meetings, which you can see on the graph down below. Of course, while this tells us about numbers, it doesn't tell us necessarily about the great qualitative exchanges that have happened there, but at least it gives us a snapshot of all of the activities in the operations in country. Simone, I think we can jump to the next one, if that's okay. There we go. As many of you know, the logistics cluster operations in country also, where required, facilitate access to services that partners might need. That might be warehousing or transport in its various forms. And this slide here gives us a little snapshot. It's based on the data that comes from the relief item tracking application. It gives us a little snapshot of the number of organizations, the type of organizations, and the number of requests that have been received so far in country operations. And you can see there, I'm looking at my sheet because I can't look that far ahead. Overall, we've got a majority of the organizations were INGOs, international NGOs, followed by the national NGOs, and then lesser numbers of UN entities, government organizations, as well as the Red Crescent family. One point that I flag up on this one is that you can see the number 23 countries there. And those of you who have eagle eyes might say, well, that's weird, because in the last slide that talked about coordination, we had far less countries. This is because of an interesting fact, and that is that, well, I thought it was quite interesting, that is that the logistics cluster activation in the Pacific region was activated in 2012 for preparedness, not just for logistics, but for a number of the other sectors. When COVID-19 impacted the region, they turned from preparedness to response, and they facilitated transport between a number of the countries in the Pacific region, which are also tracked in these figures here. So there we go, a very broad snapshot of service users up until the end of September this year. We've got a lot more detail on this, but we've minimized the slides, and we can come back to some of the deeper dive slides as needed, or share them separately after this. Simone, that'd be great if we can go to the next one. Here you can see a slightly different analysis of the service usage by partners in country. This time it's broken down by looking at the stuff itself, i.e. the relief items that were either stored or transported. On the left, you can see the volume of relief items that have been stored over the year, 116,000 cubic meters. And on the right, looking at it in metric tons of relief items that have been transported in country in these operations. And again, you can see that overall, in terms of transport, the international NGOs take up nearly 50% of those service requests by metric ton. And you might say, well, that's interesting compared to the number of service requests that came through. If you remember back to the other slide, a very high volume of the requests were there, but actually it looks as though it doesn't compare directly to the volume. And that, I think, our overall observation would be that there is greater movement of smaller volume or smaller weight items, so smaller consignments, if you like, with a lot of these requests. And luckily, I've got Celia in the room with me, so she's going to put me back on track when I get the analysis wrong. Okay, Simone, can we hop to the next one, please? We have another map here. It's not a top 10 quiz to see if we can spot the countries, but it's really just to flag up something which to many of you might be quite well known, that you can see probably the highest number of users is in those three operations. So we've got Ethiopia, South Sudan and Somalia really at the top of the number of users in terms of service provision in the operations in country. And again, you can dig a bit more deeply into this data when we share the slides and the statistics later on. Thanks, Simone. Well, it wouldn't be statistics if we didn't try to look for some trends. So here we're looking back over 4 years. always with that caveat that 2021, we don't have the full 4 quarters yet. And really, we can see, what can we see? Can we draw a useful conclusion before we have the 4th quarter? I think the jury's out on that. So it'll be interesting to see in the April GLM what the statistics look like when we have a complete year in 2021. But we can see a decrease in the number of requests as well as the metric tons transported and the cubic meters stored in 2021 compared to 2020. I think we also need a big caveat here, which is that logistics cluster operations are generally activated for as long as they're required. So the shape and number of the service provision footprint can change quite dramatically over the years. And we did have additional activations last year as well. So I'll be very curious to see in April next year, when we have the full statistics for 2021, what this looks like and if we can draw any stronger conclusions from that. Okie dokie. Let's go to the next one, please, Simone. Moving away from service provision and looking at another kind of interaction that we have with partners, whether they are facilitating the logistics cluster trainings or participating in the logistics cluster trainings or sharing logistics cluster trainings. And again, we're looking back, so we've got a snapshot over the years, looking back on the bottom slide for the face-to-faces all the way back to 2007, where you can see a huge increase in 2018, 2019, which I believe, and I'm looking at Andre here, was probably thanks to the great funding from GFFO, which really facilitated an increased number of face-to-face trainings that were made available to partners. No one will be surprised by the drop in 2020, which was when COVID-19 impacted the ability to have face-to-face trainings. Picking up again in 2021, thanks to all the hard efforts of people working out how to conduct these things in a socially distanced way. And at the top, of course, you can see a different way of training, and that is the online trainings, which again, we had a significant volume in 2020, and in 2021, the number dropping perhaps as the face-to-face trainings pick up. But of course, we have the 4th quarter of the year with a number of great trainings in the pipeline. So again, these statistics will be updated for the next GLM once we get the full year there. Okie dokies. So moving on from training, and now information management. I don't want to steal too much thunder from Magnus, who'll be presenting on IM in a bit this afternoon, or not this afternoon, but a bit later anyway. The information management includes so many different tools and platforms, and just giving a little flavor here about how these have been utilized over the course of the year. On the left-hand side, that big red graph is the websites, the country pages, if you like. And again, if you're familiar with the Logs Cluster website, you'll know that there is a specific country page where all of that information on coordination meetings, concepts of operations, maps, all of the data that the partners in country may find useful to support their operations is held. And these are the number of hits, I think it's called in the trade, the number of people accessing those web pages to try and get to the information there in order to facilitate their operations. These are all mainly country pages, whether it be operational response pages or preparedness, but we do also have the COVID-19 general page there as well, just after Syria. And in the graphs on the right-hand side, a few other observations which have been drawn from the survey at the end of the mid-year survey, sorry, correct myself there. A few comments from the mid-year survey from the partners about IM, commenting on how useful, or in a few cases, but only a very, very few cases, I think about 4%, I can't read the numbers now, but I think it's 0.6 plus 4 plus 3.1, just about 7%, there we go. We're not necessarily stating that it was driving their operational decisions, but the vast majority found this to be a very useful contribution to their operations on the ground. So just using this as an opportunity to say to people that we really rely on feedback from partners. So do let us know when you need things to be adjusted and tweaked, or even if it's a good thing, so we know what to really focus resources on moving forward. And you'll hear a lot more about this, and not just the country pages, but all the other great tools that are available from the IM platform later on today. Thanks, Simone. I mentioned very briefly there the mid-year survey. One of the questions, perhaps common to many of us around the room today, virtual or otherwise, is how to measure impact in terms of humanitarian operations. And as a logistics cluster, how do we measure the impact of that collaborative, cooperative approach? One tool that we have is the survey that we do of partners, i.e. asking partners how they are finding the support from the LOGS cluster operations in country, whether it be on facilitating access to services, the coordination, or the IM. And here we have one little piece of information. There's a whole set of other questions that people came back with, but this is just giving a high-level overview of partners' feedback on the LOGS cluster operations in country. And I think you can see here, very pleased to see that much and extreme value account for nearly 90%. Let me get my maths right, at least over 85% there, which is really very encouraging. And I'd like to thank all of the partners for everything they've done to contribute to the shape of those operations, because it's only with everybody's input and getting around the table to contribute to concept of operations and how they like to see the shape of the operation going forward so that it actually meets their gaps and needs in country. So thanks very much to all the partners in country for their participation in those fora. And I think, Anya, that's the end of the slides for it, for this one. And I think we might have an opportunity now for questions.
There's one question that's just come in, and that's from Glenn. Is there any particular reason why only 14% of the stored commodities was distributed or transported?
Glenn, I think that's a question, very good question, but one that I might have to come back on because it might be very specific to the country operation in which those commodities were being stored. And I wouldn't like to make a generic comment without understanding exactly what was the situation or context for those ones. So if that's okay with you, Glenn, I'll do a bit of research and come back on that one.
Great, thank you, Athalie. And actually, let's crack on to the next session, because we are mindful of time. And just to remind you, if you do think of any questions relating to the previous session, we will have a bit of time at the end of the day to try and answer.